Hello everyone and welcome to this special programme. Now throughout the UK there are many famous railway towns: Swindon, Doncaster, Crewe and of course Swindon. In this three-part mini-series we'll be taking a look at the railways in this historic town, starting with the famous works. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Swindon Showcase. Swindon was selected as the location of the GWR's works by Isambard Kingdom Brunel in 1840. He chose Swindon as it was the junction for Gloucester, with quarries nearby for building materials. The works opened in 1842, with its first locomotive, Great Western, being outshopped in 1846. The manager's office dates from 1842, housing the CME's office and drawing office. The building was enlarged in the 1870s and 1900. Brunel, however, wasn't a great locomotive engineer, so he recruited Daniel Gooch. Gooch was assistant to George Stephenson, becoming the GWR's first CME in 1837. As well as his broad gauge locomotives, Gooch also designed standard gauge examples for the Shrewsbury and Chester and the Shrewsbury and Birmingham, both being absorbed by the GWR in 1854. GWR's first locomotive was North Star, built by Robert Stephenson in 1837, originally for the New Orleans Railroad, and regauged from 5 foot 6 inches. Withdrawn in 1871, the original was kept at Swindon Works until 1906, with this replica being constructed in 1925. Gooch was succeeded by Joseph Armstrong in 1864, who started his railway career at Wolverhampton in 1854. The Armstrongs were a true GWR family, with Joseph's brother George being divisional superintendent at Wolverhampton from 1864 to 1897. His sons, Joseph Jr., was an engineer at Swindon, whilst John was the divisional superintendent at Paddington from 1882 to 1916. Finally, his grandson Ralph was also a divisional superintendent at Wolverhampton from 1929 to 46. In 1868, Swindon became the central works for the Great Western. The following year, a carriage works, intended for Oxford, opened to the south. It had two levels, the lower one for machinery and the upper one for construction and repairs. As well as the carriage works, a wagon works was also built in 1869, which had its own designated repair shop added in 1880. Now, in order to identify which wagon was which, the GWR employed telegraph codes, so this four-wheeled vent van, for example, is known as a mink. Armstrong was succeeded by William Dean, who started as an apprentice at Wolverhampton in 1855. He is credited with producing a range of locomotives to run on both the broad and standard gauges, known as convertibles. Other locomotives to his name include the 2600 Aberdares for freight, the 3300 Bulldogs and 3252 Dukes for passenger traffic, and the elegant 3031 Singles. Now, Dean is one of those unique engineers who not only designed locomotives, but also carriages, such as this Cleres Street Saloon. In 1897, the coach was converted into a royal saloon for Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. Withdrawn in 1930, it became a holiday home and was preserved in 1982. George Jackson Churchwood took over from Dean in 1902 and brought in radical changes with his standardisation policy, later taken up by Stanier on the LMS and Riddles for BR. He also gave the GWR its new identity, with tapered boilers and brass safety valve covers. Credits to his name include both lines of Prairie tanks, the 4300s, the first true mixed traffic locomotives in Britain, and the Great Bear, Britain's first and the GWR's only Pacific. One of Churchward's earliest designs was the City class, represented by the famous City of Truro. Now, we all know the story about how this locomotive potentially reached 100 miles an hour in its preservation career. However, the locomotive also represents a transitional period on the Great Western. You see, the chassis is an old Dean design with double frames, but the boiler is a brand new tapered design, which is pure Churchward. Churchward, however, was something of a visionary and came up with some radical new designs, such as these 280 heavy freight locomotives in 1903. He got the idea from the USA, as Churchward liked to look abroad for other ideas to implement on the GWR. Number 2818 is of the original design with inside steam pipes and a smaller cab. However, his successor Collet produced an improved version, the 2884s, with a larger cab and outside steam pipes, the last appearing in 1942. In 1902, the famous A shop opened, followed by a testing plant in 1904. The latter was inspired by a similar example installed at the Purdue University in Indiana in 1891. 1914 came war, and the railway sent various locomotives to France to help with the war effort. The GWR's contribution included 62 of these, the Dean Goods, in 1917. However, their demob story in 1919 is rather more interesting, because of those 62 locomotives, only 46 returned to France. The other 16 went to Greece, who in turn sold 2 of them to Turkey. In 1921, Charles Collet became CME and continued the standardisation set out by Churchward. He also updated some designs, such as the halls from the Saints, the 5600s from various South Wales designs, and the 1400s from the Armstrong 517s. Collet's first design for the Great Western is of course his famous Castle class. These are a development of the earlier Churchward styles, keeping the 4-cylinder layout, and in 1924 Caerphilly Castle here was displayed at Wembley, alongside the Great Northern's A1 Flying Scotsman. This led to a series of trials between the two designs, with the castle proving to be more powerful and economical. Another castle, number 5000, was loaned to the LMS, again taking part in a series of trials, which eventually led to the introduction of the Royal Scots. The castles were soon rostered onto the Great Western's top link expresses, such as the Bristolian, the Cornish Riviera Express to Penzance, and of course the Cheltenham Flyer, which, with an average speed of 71 miles per hour, was the fastest scheduled service in the world. Throughout their lives, the castles underwent a number of modifications. Manorbier Castle, for example, was partially streamlined, whilst 1956 saw the introduction of double chimneys and a 3-row superheater, with 65 being fitted with a 4-row superheater. But I want to talk about something that gets rather overlooked: tenders. You see, when the castles first came out, they were fitted with these 3,500 gallon examples, but these proved to be too small. So Collet drew up a 4,000 gallon example, whilst Hawksworth introduced a flat-sided tender. Another problem with the castle was that they were restricted to a 20-ton axle loading, as imposed by the civil engineer. However, the Plymouth and Wolverhampton main lines were later upgraded to take a 22.5-ton loading. The image-conscious Felix Pohl, the GWR's general manager, immediately ordered a new locomotive, the result being the King class, the most powerful 460 in the UK. A novel feature of the King is the front bogie, due to its relationship with the cylinders. Now, if you look here, the leading axle has the axle box mounted externally. However, the rear pair is mounted under the cylinder, so the axle box is mounted internally, giving this unique arrangement. In 1927, the class leader, number 6000 King George V, attended the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Centenary, being presented with this commemorative bell and cabside medallions. Like Dean, Collett is also credited with a number of carriage designs. Now this might look like an ordinary buffet car, but it's actually one of two quick lunch bars introduced in 1934. In preservation, the coach first went to Clapham in 1962 and spent some time on the Severn Valley from 1973 to 1992. During World War II, part of the works was given over to Short Brothers for manufacturing Spitfires and Bailey bridges in 1944. The works also outshopped 80 LMS 8Fs, one of which, number 8431, is preserved on the Keighley and Worth Valley. Surprisingly, the works only suffered one air raid, with minimal damage, on the 27th of July, 1942. Frederick Hawkesworth had trained under both Churchwood and Collett, becoming the Great Western's last CME in 1941. Somewhat restricted by the war, his designs included the modified halls and three types of pannier, merely updates of older designs. He did, however, produce a new class, the Counties, and is credited with a proposed Pacific, which he dismissed as a draftsman's dream. Another of the GWR's iconic types of locomotive is of course the pannier tank, which has its origins back in the 1890s. However, by the time Hawkesworth arrived, many were in dire straits and in desperate need of replacement, the result being the 9400s. Now these broke with Swindon tradition in two ways. Firstly, the smoke box was extended beyond the pannier tanks, and the second was the fact that only the first 10 came from Swindon. The rest were built by either the Yorkshire Engine Company, Bagnall or Robert Stevenson. After 1948, Swindon continued to outshop pre-nationalisation designs, such as the Castles and those from Hawkesworth. The last GWR locomotive to appear was 1600 number 1669 in 1955. Thereafter, Swindon only focused on the BR standards. These included the 4MT460, the 3MT260 and 262 tanks, and 53 9Fs, as well as diesel hydraulics. The first diesel hydraulic appeared in 1958, and 2 years later, 9F number 92220 Evening Star became not only Swindon's, but BR's last steam locomotive to be built. In 1962, Swindon was downgraded to a repair shop in the BTC's National Workshop Plan. This saw the closure of both the carriage and wagon works. However, an apprentice training school and diesel testing station were established. Taken over by British Rail Engineering Limited in 1970, Swindon produced its last locomotive in 1980, 20080 diesel hydraulics for use in Kenya. Closure eventually came in 1986, with the site sold to Tarmac Swindon Limited. 2000 saw the opening of a new museum, replacing the original in Farringdon Road. The museum was set up in the old R shop, a former machine and turning room. The remaining part of the works has been given over to the MacArthur Glen Group, who have turned it into a designer outlet and shopping complex. Inside the complex is Manor number 7821 Ditchit Manor, one of the 10 post-war batch from 1950. Working on the Cambrian from 1959 to 64, she left Barry in 1981. Her restoration was completed at Swindon in 1998, and since then she's been based at the West Somerset, Great Central and Churnet Valley. Two other survivors are the 65-foot turntable, installed in 1902, and the pattern shop with its water tank, which is now a church. Coming up in part 2, we'll take a look at the village built for the workers and their families. Be sure to like, subscribe and leave a comment, and don't forget to follow the Facebook page, link in the description. Bye for now.